The CEO walked into a winter party alone and came face to face with his ex-wife and four identical children. He built an empire worth billions, but in one unexpected moment, at a glittering winter gala in Paris, everything Julian Hart thought he knew came crashing down. Across the ballroom stood his ex-wife, holding the hands of four identical little boys with his eyes. What she whispered next shattered his world. "They're yours. Secrets buried for years, a love left unfinished, and a truth too powerful to ignore." This is the shocking story of how a ruthless CEO faced the one thing his money couldn't control: fatherhood. Stay until the end, because the final twist will leave you speechless. Before we begin the story, leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our latest stories. Enjoy the story. The grand ballroom of the plaza shimmered in 1,000 golden reflections, each crystal dangling from the chandelier, catching the glow of 100 flashbulbs. Outside, snow-blanketed Fifth Avenue in silence. But inside, the air buzzed with chatter, clinking glasses, and the forced laughter of New York's elite. Julian Hart, 43, billionaire CEO of one of the world's largest tech conglomerates, stood near a towering ice sculpture shaped like a globe, a tribute to his company's latest sustainability initiative. Yet his expression was distant, his glass of champagne untouched. He had come alone. The official reason was that his longtime girlfriend, Vanessa Cole, had come down with a sudden migraine. But the truth was more complicated. Lately, her interrogations after every event had become unbearable. Julian had started to crave silence more than conversation, distance more than display. He was about to slip away from the crowd when he saw her. Clara. Time warped. 6 years had passed since their divorce, yet she stood before him as if no years had elapsed. Her copper hair fell in soft waves over a navy blue velvet dress, elegant in its simplicity, a quiet rebellion in a sea of sequins and diamonds. Her back was straight, her gaze unreadable. But that wasn't what froze Julian in place. It was the children. 4 boys, 4 tiny replicas of himself. They stood beside Clara, all about the same height, perhaps 5 years old, each with the same piercing steel-gray eyes that had made Julian a legend in boardrooms, the same defined cheekbones, the same cleft chin. Like a glitch in the Matrix, they looked at him with curiosity, wonder, and something else he couldn't name. A server walked past, offering another round of champagne, but Julian didn't move. His hand trembled slightly as he set his untouched glass down. The hum of the gala faded to a distant buzz. For a moment, all he could hear was the pounding of his own heartbeat. He stepped forward, unable to stop himself. Clara saw him. Her eyes widened, but she didn't flinch. She whispered something to the boys, who all turned toward Julian in eerie unison. The air between them thickened with questions unspoken. Julian stopped just a few feet away, struggling to form words. Then the smallest boy took a step forward, pointing. "Mommy," he asked, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "why does that man look like me?" The impact was immediate. Conversations faltered. Eyes turned. A camera flashed. Julian's world tilted. "Clara," he managed, his voice low and brittle, "we need to talk." Her lips parted, but it was the eldest-looking boy who spoke next. His tone calm, clear, and devastatingly confident. "Are you our dad?" The ballroom had never been so quiet. This was the kind of moment that didn't belong in Julian's world. His life was built on algorithms, market predictions, and precision. things he could measure, control. But standing in front of him were four variables he had never anticipated, and all of them had his face. Everything. His reputation, his empire, his future teetered on the edge of a single truth. Were they his? The answer shimmered in the eyes of each child, reflected back at him like a mirror fractured into four. Whatever certainty Julian had walked into that ballroom with, it crumbled in that instant. And what unfolded next would not only expose long-buried secrets and shatter illusions, it would challenge everything he believed about success, family, and love. If you've made it this far, trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. This story is only beginning, and the ending will shake you. So hit that subscribe button, support the channel, and stay with us until the very end. You're about to witness a transformation like no other. Julian stood frozen as Clara gently guided the boys to a quieter corner of the ballroom, away from the prying eyes now locked onto them. He followed her without a word, his steps unsure, as though the marble beneath his polished shoes had turned to ice. For a man who closed multi-billion-dollar deals with ease, who commanded attention in every room he walked into, Julian Hart now felt smaller than he ever had. They found a dimly lit alcove, secluded behind a curtain of white hydrangeas and soft golden lights. Clara positioned the boys in a semicircle, her posture both calm and guarded. The children clung to her sides, watching Julian with expressions that varied from cautious to curious. One of them clutched a toy car. Another stared at Julian's watch, eyes wide with fascination. Julian's voice came out hoarse. "What are their names?" Clara glanced down at the boys and exhaled. "This is Theo," she said, pointing to the one in the forest green sweater who had spoken first. "Next to him is Isaac. He's the quiet one. Liam is the one with the toy car. And Noah." She hesitated. "Noah's the one trying to take apart the hydrangeas." Julian blinked. "They're all mine?" Clara looked at him, her eyes suddenly sharp. "I don't think we need a DNA test for that, do you?" The truth of it was written in every mirrored feature. Julian couldn't deny it. He didn't want to. But he was drowning in the realization. 4 lives. 5 years. A universe he hadn't known existed. He tried to speak, but found only silence. "I tried to tell you," Clara said softly. "After the divorce, when I found out I was pregnant, I reached out multiple times. Letters, emails. Your office said you were unavailable. Eventually, they told me to stop contacting you." He swallowed hard. "I never saw any of that." "I figured as much," she said, "but after a while, I stopped trying. You had made your choice. I made mine." Julian ran a hand through his hair, stunned. "You raised them alone." Clara nodded. "They're my entire world." Theo tugged on her sleeve. "Mommy, are we going home soon?" "In a bit, sweetheart," she said, smoothing his hair. Julian knelt to their level, his movements slow and unsure, like a man approaching wild animals afraid they might bolt. "Hi," he said, his voice tender. I'm Julian. I think I might be your dad." The boys exchanged looks. Isaac tilted his head. "You sound like the man in Mommy's story." "What story?" Julian asked. Clara's smile was faint but genuine. "They've asked about their dad. I told them he was smart, brave, but busy changing the world." Liam narrowed his eyes. "Are you really that busy?" Julian laughed, the sound surprising even to him. "I guess I was. but maybe not for the right reasons. Before anything more could be said, the sound of clicking heels broke the fragile moment. Vanessa. Of course. Julian turned just as she emerged from the crowd like a storm wrapped in silk, her red dress clinging to her like armor. Her eyes zeroed in on Clara and the boys. She stopped short when she saw their faces. 4 identical versions of Julian. Vanessa's expression turned to shock, then fury. What? What is this? Clara stepped protectively in front of the boys. Julian rose and positioned himself beside her. Vanessa, he said, his voice calm but firm. This isn't the time. Vanessa ignored him. Are you kidding me, Julian? You brought this here? I didn't know they'd be here, he said. You didn't know, she hissed. You have children, 4 of them, and you never thought to mention it? I found out 30 minutes ago, he said through gritted teeth. Just like you. The boys watched the exchange, wide-eyed. Clara knelt down again, her voice soothing. Why don't we go get your coats, boys? Julian turned to Vanessa. Please don't make a scene. But it was too late. Phones were out. Guests whispered. And somewhere in the distance, Julian spotted a photographer lifting a lens. Everything was unraveling. Clara gathered the boys, shielding them from the escalating tension. As she ushered them away, Julian followed. He looked back once at Vanessa, whose face was a portrait of betrayal and humiliation. But his mind had already shifted. The only thing that mattered now was the truth, and the family he never knew he had, and nothing. Not his image, not his empire, not Vanessa, would keep him from it. Julian stepped out of the ballroom with Clara, and the boys trailing quietly behind him. The cold air of New York winter hit hard as they exited through a side entrance of the plaza, far from the clicking cameras and murmuring guests still inside. He shrugged off his overcoat and wrapped it around Clara's shoulders, noting her slight shiver. She didn't protest, and that small gesture of acceptance gave him a sliver of hope. They walked in silence to a waiting car. His car, always kept close by, always ready. Julian opened the door, gesturing for them to enter. Clara hesitated. We should just grab a cab, she said, her voice wary. Please, he said quietly. Let me do something. Even if it's just the ride home. After a long pause, she nodded. Fine, but only to our place. The ride was silent at first. The boys were tucked in close to Clara, pressed against the windows, watching the city lights. Julian sat across from them, unsure where to place his hands, his feet, his breath. For once, he was in a room where he didn't know the rules. He could navigate boardrooms blindfolded, outthink competitors mid-deal. But this was foreign territory. I live in Chelsea, Clara said eventually. 5th floor walk-up. Not glamorous, but it's home. Julian nodded, unsure what to say. The word Chelsea pinged something in his memory, an email from his assistant months ago about unopened letters forwarded from an old P.O. box in Chelsea. Had that been her? I'm sorry, he said suddenly, the words shocking even himself. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I didn't know. But that doesn't change the fact that I should have been. Clara turned her head slightly, eyes fixed on the skyline. Regret doesn't erase absence. Julian looked at the boys. They weren't talking, but they were listening. He could feel it. I don't want to be absent anymore. At the red light, Theo, the eldest by mere minutes, turned to him. Do you have a dog? The question came out of nowhere, but Julian didn't flinch. No, not yet. Theo considered that. We can't have one. Our landlord says no pets. Well, Julian replied, seizing on the opening. Maybe someday. We could all go to the park and walk someone else's dog. Would that be fun? Liam lit up. I want to walk a big one. Like a wolf, Isaac grinned. Can we name him Sir Barks-a-Lot? The car filled with laughter, and for the first time since the gala, something eased in Julian's chest. When they arrived, Clara stepped out first and helped the boys out one by one. Julian followed, feeling painfully overdressed and utterly out of place in his tailored tuxedo. He looked up at the modest brownstone, noting the cracked steps and peeling paint. It wasn't what he was used to, but there was something deeply real about it. Lived in. Loved. He hesitated at the threshold. Come in, Clara said at last. It's late, and I know you have questions. Inside, the apartment was warm but tight. Toys were scattered, drawings taped to the fridge, and the faint smell of cinnamon lingered in the air. The boys kicked off their shoes without ceremony and ran down the hallway toward their room, already calling dibs on the top bunk. Clara offered him a seat at the kitchen table and poured 2 mugs of lukewarm chamomile tea. Julian sat, his hands cupped around the mug like he was anchoring himself. They don't have any idea who I am, do they? He asked. They know there was someone, she said. I never told them you were gone. I just told them their dad was somewhere far away, doing important things. That's not exactly inaccurate, he murmured. It was kinder than the truth. Julian leaned forward. Clara, I need to make this right. You don't make up for 5 years with a single conversation. I'm not trying to, he replied. I'm asking for a chance to know them, to be part of their lives, even if it starts slow, even if I earn it 1 Lego brick at a time. That caught her off guard. You remember the Legos? He smiled softly. I remember everything about you. Her expression faltered. But then came the nod. Not full forgiveness, but an opening. They're asleep in 10 minutes or less. It's been a long day. Can I come back tomorrow? After school. We go to the park after 3:30. If you really want to be there, you'll know where to find us. Julian stood, lingering for a moment. Thank you. As he left, the cold air bit into him again, but it felt different this time. For the first time in years, Julian Hart wasn't walking back into a penthouse full of silence. He was walking toward something uncertain, something imperfect, something that might finally matter more than all the empires he'd built. The next afternoon, the wind had softened slightly, and the gray sky hung low over Central Park. Parents clustered near the playground entrance, wrapped in scarves, sipping coffee from paper cups while their kids tumbled across slides and monkey bars. Julian stood back from the group, his hands tucked into the pockets of a cashmere coat. He scanned the crowd, heart ticking faster than any boardroom pitch or earnings call ever had. Then he saw them. Clara was seated on a worn wooden bench, her cheeks pink from the cold, watching the boys run wild through the mulch-covered park. Theo was at the top of the jungle gym, calling out instructions like a general. Isaac was climbing below, grunting with theatrical effort, while Liam sprinted circles around the swing set. Julian's eyes searched for the fourth until he saw Ezra, the quietest of the 4, sitting cross-legged beneath a tree with a sketch pad in his lap. Julian approached slowly, unsure if he should wave or wait, but Theo spotted him first. "Mom, he came!" he shouted, nearly losing his grip on the bars in excitement. Clara turned, caught mid-sip of her coffee. Her expression held no smile, but no protest either, just a calm, tired acknowledgement. Julian took that as his cue. "Hi," he said. breath visible in the cold air. I didn't want to be late, Clara nodded, pulling her coat tighter. We usually stay here for an hour. I brought something. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a box, an astronaut-themed science kit. I thought maybe they'd like this. Clara eyed it. You don't have to buy your way in, Julian. I'm not trying to. He looked over at the boys. I just remember how much I used to love space when I was their age. Thought maybe they would too. She studied him, then finally relented. All right. But no sugar bribes. Isaac will bounce off the walls all night. Julian laughed softly. Noted. He knelt in the grass near Ezra, who didn't look up from his sketchbook. What are you drawing? Julian asked. Ezra glanced sideways, eyeing him cautiously. Then without a word, he flipped the pad around. It was a pencil sketch of the playground, surprisingly detailed for a 5-year-old. Each figure was carefully formed, and in the corner, a taller figure with dark hair stood beneath a tree. That's me? Ezra nodded. Julian swallowed the lump in his throat. It's really good. You have your mom's gift. Ezra blinked at him. Do you draw? I used to, when I had time, but I think I forgot how. Maybe I can teach you, Ezra said. Julian didn't trust himself to speak, so he just smiled and ruffled Ezra's hair. Later, when the boys took turns launching the toy rockets from the science kit into the chilly air, Julian stood beside Clara on the edge of the field. They like you, she said quietly, arms folded. I'm trying to earn it, he replied. I know it'll take time. Clara tilted her head, her gaze fixed on Isaac, who was already dissecting the rocket's launch mechanism. Time, effort, and a whole lot of patience. They've had each other their whole lives, and me. But you're the new piece. I don't want to replace anything, Julian said. I just want to belong somewhere in it. She looked at him then, for a long moment. Not as a scorned ex, not as a mother guarding her sons, but as Clara. The woman who once loved him enough to dream of a life that might have included days like this. Belonging takes showing up, she said at last. Not just today, not just when it's easy. I will, he promised. I'm not going anywhere this time. They watched together as the sun began to set behind the trees. The boys still laughing, still throwing foam rockets into the sky like dreams they refused to let fall. Julian didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, he felt ready to meet it. Not alone, not on his own terms, but as someone stepping back into a story that had always been waiting for him to return. The next morning, Julian woke earlier than usual. His penthouse, sleek and silent as always, no longer felt like the haven it once had. After years of chasing perfection and power, silence had grown too loud. The luxury furnishings, the pristine countertops, the panoramic city view. It all felt sterile compared to the color and clamor of Central Park the day before, where 4 boys had shrieked with laughter and launched toy rockets like they were sending hope into the atmosphere. He brewed his coffee and opened his email, instinctively checking stock updates, investor reports, and press briefings. It took effort to drag his gaze past the flashing alerts and scroll to a folder he hadn't touched in years. Personal. Inside was a single video file. He clicked play. It was grainy, dated. Clara was younger, laughing in the sunlight. Julian had filmed her as she sat cross-legged on a picnic blanket, pregnant belly beneath a loose summer dress, reading a children's book aloud, even though there were no children yet. Just the two of them, dreaming. He watched the full minute in silence, heart aching with what could have been. Then he shut the laptop, reached for his phone, and texted Clara. "If you and the boys are free this evening, I'd love to take you all out to dinner. Somewhere casual. Just time together." A minute later, her reply came. "They'd like that. Usual chaos. Don't say I didn't warn you." That evening, Julian waited outside a small family-run Italian restaurant in Brooklyn, far from his usual scene of five-star venues and media attention. He wore jeans for the first time in years. When Clara arrived with the boys, bundled in their winter coats and scarves, Julian opened the door and stepped aside, a strange, nervous energy bubbling in his chest. The hostess seated them in a back corner, a booth wide enough for 4 wiggly bodies and 2 adults trying to maintain some semblance of order. Julian sat across from Clara, wedged between Isaac and Liam, while Theo took it upon himself to order for everyone, insisting on the biggest pizza with everything on it. Ezra nestled next to Clara, flipping through the menu, but not saying much. As they waited, conversation spilled like spilled soda. Quick, sticky, chaotic. Julian learned that Isaac was obsessed with sharks, that Liam had lost a tooth the day before and was waiting for the tooth fairy, and that Theo had written a letter to NASA asking how long it would take to fly to Jupiter. Julian listened, asked questions, and laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in what felt like forever. But it was Ezra who tugged at his sleeve midway through the meal, holding a folded piece of paper. Julian unfolded it carefully. It was another sketch, this time of the dinner table. All 5 of them seated exactly as they were now, with accurate expressions and even little details like the pattern on the napkins. "You remembered the salt shaker," Julian said softly. Ezra nodded. "I draw what feels important." Julian blinked away the sudden sting in his eyes. "Thank you, Ezra. I'll keep this forever." Across the table, Clara met his gaze, and for a moment, the noise faded around them. She gave him a look. Quiet, measured, not yet trust, but no longer guarded. A door creaked open. After dinner, the boys ran ahead to the car, giving Julian a rare moment alone with her as they walked behind. "You were good with them," Clara said quietly. "I'm trying." She glanced sideways at him. "Trying matters, but you'll have to keep showing up, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." "I will," he said. They reached the car, and as the boys piled in, Julian hesitated. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice softer now, "about what I missed, about what I still have a chance to be. If it's all right with you, I'd like to take the next step, really get to know them, be a part of their lives, more than dinner or park visits." Clara studied him, arms crossed loosely, breath misting in the cold air. "That's not just my decision," she said. "It's theirs too. You'll have to earn it, Julian, one day at a time." "I plan to," he said, watching the 4 heads bounce in the back seat, a chorus of laughter and arguing already starting again. Clara climbed in and started the car. Julian stood back, hands in his pockets, watching as the taillights disappeared into the night. For the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't just standing still, but starting to move forward, toward something real, something lasting, something worth every risk. The next few weeks passed in a blur of quiet transformation. Julian no longer watched life from the windows of his penthouse. Instead, he found himself in school gyms for Saturday morning basketball games, squeezing into miniature chairs at parent-teacher nights, and learning that 4 little boys could consume an unbelievable amount of peanut butter sandwiches in one afternoon. At first, it was small things. Texting Clara every morning to ask how the boys were doing, showing up after work to read bedtime stories, bringing over science kits and coloring books. But each gesture chipped away at the mountain of absence he had left behind. One rainy Thursday, Julian arrived at Clara's apartment with soaked shoes and a brown bag full of takeout. Theo met him at the door, breathless and wide-eyed. "Dad!" Liam fell off the couch doing a backflip, and now he's got a ninja bandage. Julian blinked. "A what?" "Come see?" In the living room, Liam was perched on the couch with an oversized Star Wars bandage on his forehead, grinning like a war hero. Isaac and Ezra were arguing over who had the better Lego spaceship, while Clara sat on the floor, cross-legged, sorting through bills. Julian handed her the food. "You okay?" She gave him a weary smile. "Just life." He hesitated, then knelt beside her. "Let me help." Clara looked at him, not with suspicion, but surprise. "With dinner?" "With all of it." For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then she nodded slowly. "Okay." Later that night, after the boys had eaten and collapsed into a chaotic pile of pillows and blankets for movie night, Clara and Julian sat on the fire escape, sharing the last of the garlic knots under a misty drizzle. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked suddenly, looking out at the skyline. "Your old life?" "I thought I did," he said. "But the truth is, I think I was more alone in that penthouse than I ever was in an empty boardroom." Clara let that settle. "They love you already, you know. They won't say it yet, not all of them, but I see it. I don't want to disappoint them." "Then don't," she said simply. He turned to her. "And what about you?" "I'm not asking for anything, Julian. This isn't about us." "I know," he said quietly, "but I think it could be." She didn't respond, and that was okay. Trust was a slow road, one he'd walked away from before. This time, he would stay on it. That weekend, Julian took the boys to the Natural History Museum. It was chaos in every sense. Ezra wandered off sketching dinosaur skeletons. Theo attempted to barter a granola bar with a security guard for access to a closed exhibit, and Liam convinced a group of tourists that he was training to be a junior astronaut agent. But it was Isaac who stopped Julian in his tracks. They stood before the whale exhibit, the massive blue creature suspended above them, light casting ripples across the dark room. Isaac slipped his hand into Julian's. "Do you miss having a big job?" he asked. Julian looked down. "I still have one, but you're not on TV anymore, or at those big fancy buildings." "I'm doing something more important now." Isaac tilted his head. "More important than making lots of money?" Julian smiled. "Much more. I'm making memories. With you." Isaac didn't say anything for a moment. Then he squeezed Julian's hand tighter and whispered, "I'm glad you're our dad." It wasn't a proclamation. It was quiet, like a secret. But it landed with more force than anything Julian had heard in a boardroom, courtroom, or investor call. That night, Julian sat alone in his penthouse for what he realized would be the last time. The stillness wasn't peaceful anymore. It was hollow. He stood, walked to the glass wall, and looked out at the city not with ambition, but with clarity. It was time to leave this life behind. Not to escape, but to begin. Tomorrow, he'd call a realtor. He'd find something real. Something with enough rooms for 4 beds and maybe a messy art corner. He'd talk to Clara about it, not as a gesture, but as a plan. And he'd do it not just because the boys needed a father, but because he finally wanted to be one. A month had passed since Julian first stepped into Clara's apartment with a paper bag of food and a hesitant heart. Since then, things had shifted, not in grand, cinematic flourishes, but in the subtle rhythms of everyday life. Mornings were now filled with mismatched socks, cereal spills, and 4 different versions of "I can't find my shoes." Evenings were a whirl of multiplication tables, bath time negotiations, and bedtime stories that somehow always ended with everyone in the same bed, limbs tangled like roots of the same tree. Julian had never imagined that something so chaotic could also feel so complete. He'd moved out of his penthouse 2 weeks earlier. The townhouse he purchased was in a quiet Brooklyn neighborhood, close to the park, the boys' school, and just 5 blocks from Clara's place. He didn't ask Clara to move in, not yet, but he designed the space with them in mind. Each boy had his own room, decorated with their favorite colors and filled with small, thoughtful details. He even built a makeshift art studio in the corner of the sunroom for Ezra and stocked a tool bench for Theo's experiments. The fridge was full of snacks that Liam liked, and Isaac's favorite books had a whole shelf to themselves. But despite all the progress, Julian could feel an undercurrent. Clara was careful, present, warm, but cautious. She laughed with him easily, even accepted his help without hesitation. But there was a line she hadn't let him cross, not emotionally, and certainly not romantically. He understood. He had abandoned her once, even if unintentionally. Earning her trust would take more than consistency. It would take clarity. That chance came unexpectedly during a rainy Sunday afternoon when Clara called in a panic. "Julian, it's Ezra." He slipped in the kitchen, cut his palm pretty badly. "I'm taking him to the ER, but I can't bring all 4. Can you come?" "I'm already on my way." 15 minutes later, Julian stood in Clara's doorway, soaked through but focused. Liam was clinging to her leg. Theo was trying not to cry, and Isaac stood pale-faced, watching his twin being carried toward the elevator. "Go," Julian said gently. "I've got them." Clara nodded, breathless. "Text me when you can." As soon as the door shut, the boys erupted. "I saw blood," Liam yelled. "Ezra's gonna need a robot hand," Theo announced. "Is he gonna be okay?" Isaac asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Julian knelt. "He's going to be fine. Your mom's with him, and we're going to hold the fort down here, okay?" They ended up building a blanket fort in the living room, distracting themselves with snacks and a movie marathon. But Julian could see the worry etched into Isaac's small face. Later, after the other 2 had fallen asleep inside the makeshift fort, Julian sat beside Isaac on the couch. The boy was holding Ezra's favorite sketchbook, fingers curled around the edge, like it might disappear if he let go. "You know," Julian said softly, "Ezra's one of the bravest kids I know. He'll probably come home with a cool scar and an even cooler story." Isaac didn't laugh. "What if he's scared?" he whispered. "What if he thinks we weren't there for him?" Julian's heart clenched. "Then we remind him that being a family doesn't mean we're all in the same place at the same time. It means we show up, however we can. And I promise you, I'm not going anywhere." Isaac turned his head slowly, studying him. "You mean it? Like, for real?" Julian nodded. "For real." Isaac reached into the sketchbook and pulled out a page Ezra had drawn the day before. It was the 5 of them. Julian in the middle, arms stretched out, with 4 smaller versions around him. The caption read, "Our dad." Julian swallowed. "That's the best drawing I've ever seen." Clara returned later that night, exhausted but smiling. Ezra had needed a few stitches, but he was okay. She stepped into the apartment, took one look at the collapsed blanket fort and two kids snoring on top of each other, and let out a breath. "You did good," she said. Julian smiled, standing in the hallway with Isaac still asleep in his arms. "I didn't do anything special. I just stayed." Clara looked at him, something softening behind her tired eyes. Maybe that's what's been missing all along. She reached out and brushed a damp curl off Isaac's forehead, then looked up at Julian again. "You're not just visiting anymore, are you?" "No," Julian said quietly. "I'm home." And though she didn't say it aloud, Clara nodded, just once. Enough to let him know she believed it too. The days after Ezra's accident blurred into a rhythm both comforting and revealing. With Ezra healing, Julian found himself invited deeper into the fabric of their daily lives. It wasn't that Clara made some grand declaration or changed the locks to let him move in. Instead, it was in the smallest things. The way she handed him the grocery list without explanation, or how the boys now expected him at the dinner table without even asking. He had stopped being a visitor. He had become part of the cadence. One Friday evening, as twilight settled across the Brooklyn skyline, Julian stood barefoot in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, while Liam danced in front of the oven chanting, "Pizza night, pizza night." Theo was under the table gathering Lego pieces, while Isaac sat in the corner quietly helping Ezra color around the edges of a school project. Clara leaned against the doorframe, watching the scene with tired eyes and a smile that she didn't try to hide anymore. Later that night, after the boys had been tucked into bed, Clara joined Julian on the rooftop patio of the townhouse. The city stretched before them, alive, electric, and completely unaware of the quiet transformation taking place just a few stories above. "I never thought we'd end up here," she said softly, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Me neither," Julian replied, leaning on the rail beside her. "But now I can't imagine being anywhere else." They stood there in silence for a while, listening to the hum of distant traffic and the occasional bark of a dog below. Then Clara turned toward him, her voice more vulnerable than he'd ever heard it. "Do you remember the last thing you said to me before we signed the divorce papers?" Julian looked at her, a trace of guilt flickering behind his eyes. "I told you I couldn't be what you needed, that I was building something too big to stop." Clara nodded. "And I told you I wasn't asking you to stop, just to look back every once in a while." She didn't say it to wound him, but it landed with weight all the same. "I was wrong," Julian said, stepping closer. "Not just about leaving. I was wrong to believe that love could wait. That time wouldn't matter. It does. And I lost too much of it already." Clara studied him, her expression unreadable. "And now, I know that building something big isn't worth much if you're alone at the top. I don't want that life anymore. I want this one. I want us." The rooftop lights glowed softly around them as Clara took a breath, eyes glimmering but unsure. "I'm not afraid of loving you again, Julian. I'm afraid of trusting you with what we've built in your absence. These boys, they're not just mine anymore. They're ours. But they've been shaped by the absence, too. You don't just step in and erase that." "I know," Julian replied, voice low. "I don't want to erase it. I want to earn my place in their story." Clara looked away toward the skyline. "Then start by showing up again tomorrow." "I will," he said without hesitation. "Every tomorrow after that, too." She let the moment hang there, heavy and raw and honest. Then she nodded. Okay. As they went back inside, Julian peeked into the boys' room. 4 small bodies sprawled across twin beds and blankets. Ezra's bandaged hand was draped over the edge of the mattress, and Isaac clutched his favorite stuffed giraffe. Julian knelt down and gently pulled the blanket over Theo's shoulder, brushing back a curl. He felt Clara watching from the hallway. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Walking away when you didn't know?" Julian took a moment. "Every day. But if I hadn't, I might never have realized how much I needed this. You. Them. I'm not the same man I was." "No," Clara said, a little surprised by how true that sounded. "You're not. And maybe, just maybe, that was why this time could be different." The city was buzzing with early spring energy. When Julian sat down across from his board at Grayson and Wolf, his posture firm, but his expression softer than usual. The weekly strategy meeting was meant to cover growth projections, new partnerships, and a major merger scheduled to finalize within the next 6 months. But none of that held the same urgency anymore. Not since the night on Clara's rooftop. His assistant, Miranda, was mid-presentation when she paused and looked over at him, waiting for a cue. Julian hadn't spoken yet. His gaze lingered on the folder in front of him, but his mind was elsewhere. 4 small faces eating cereal around a breakfast table in Brooklyn. One of them sneaking jelly beans into his pocket, thinking no one noticed. "I need to speak before we continue," Julian finally said, clearing his throat. "This won't take long." The room quieted. The board members, used to Julian's confident efficiency, now waited with a curiosity that edged on concern. "I've spent years driving this company forward. I've sacrificed holidays, family, and relationships to build what we have now. And I don't regret the success we've achieved." He paused. "But I do regret what it cost me personally." He let the silence breathe before continuing. 2 months ago, I learned I have 4 sons, quadruplets. They're 5 years old." The room stirred. Some eyes widened. Others dropped to their phones, already confirming whispers that had trickled in from the fringes of Julian's world. But he didn't flinch. He'd lived too long in half-truths. "I had no idea they existed. Their mother, my ex-wife, Clara, tried to reach me. Letters, calls. But I was too buried in meetings and forward momentum to look back. Until I walked into that winter gala and saw 4 miniature versions of myself staring back at me. There were tight nods, a few awkward chuckles, but mostly silence. I'm not sharing this as a press strategy. This isn't a confession or a PR maneuver. This is about transparency. I'm restructuring my schedule. I'll still be leading this company, but I won't be sacrificing my second chance at fatherhood for any contract or quarterly win." One of the board members, Lillian Cross, leaned forward. "Are you stepping back from your role, Julian?" "No," he said firmly. "But I'm stepping differently. I'll be home by 6. I'll attend school performances. I'll say yes to field trips and weekend projects, even if it means pushing back a negotiation call." Lillian smiled faintly. "We built this company so people could afford that kind of life. Maybe it's time our CEO lives it too." After the meeting, Julian returned to the townhouse where Clara and the boys were waiting. He found Liam building a fort in the living room, Isaac drawing spacemen on the walls. Fortunately, the dry erase kind, and Theo curled up with a book far too advanced for his age. Ezra was at the table, brow furrowed in concentration, piecing together a small robot kit Julian had brought home last week. "How'd the meeting go?" Clara asked from the kitchen. "Well enough," he replied, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "I think they were more shocked that I showed up in person and didn't reschedule for once." Clara handed him a mug of coffee. "You're starting to surprise even yourself." "Maybe I am." He took a sip, then crouched down beside Ezra, guiding his small hands over the wiring. Ezra didn't say much, but when he looked up and smiled, Julian knew he was exactly where he needed to be. That night, as bedtime neared, Isaac crawled into Julian's lap and asked, "Do you have to go back to your big building tomorrow?" Julian looked over at Clara, who stood at the doorway listening. "I have to go sometimes, yes," he said honestly, "but I'll always come home." "Promise?" Isaac whispered. "I promise," Julian said, kissing the top of his son's head. "No more missing birthdays. No more being a ghost. I'm here." Clara watched the scene, her arms folded over her chest, her eyes not just softened, but clear. Clear in a way that said she believed him. Maybe for the first time since the day she gave birth alone. She didn't say a word, but her presence beside him said everything. They were no longer dancing around the past. They were rebuilding something new, something messy, honest, and real. Julian Grayson was no longer just the CEO of an empire. He was a father, a partner, and slowly becoming the man he should have been all along. The spring air in Central Park carried the kind of warmth that hinted at summer, the kind that encouraged bare feet on grass and long wandering conversations. Julian Grayson stood near a wooden picnic bench, watching as his sons dashed across the meadow with an energy that seemed to defy nature. 4 small bodies, indistinguishable to most, yet entirely unique in his eyes. Theo's careful pace, Isaac's wild laughter, Ezra's analytical squint as he searched for bugs near a tree trunk, and Liam's magnetic pull to lead any game they invented. Clara sat nearby, a book in her lap, but her eyes drawn to the same sight. She smiled when Julian looked over. They didn't need to speak. This had become their new rhythm. Shared glances, knowing smiles, the quiet beauty of 2 people who had lived through distance, misunderstanding, and missed chances, and still somehow found their way back to a place where love felt not only possible, but inevitable. It had been nearly 3 months since the winter gala that changed everything. Since Julian had locked eyes with 4 little boys, who shattered the foundation of his self-made empire and replaced it with something far stronger: family. 3 months since Clara had let down her walls, not all at once, but enough to let him in again. And Julian had done what many men in his position would have never dared. He'd stayed. He adjusted his schedule, restructured his company, and, most surprisingly to his old self, found joy in the chaos of mornings, filled with mismatched socks and cereal debates. His townhouse was no longer a silent retreat of modern art and glass surfaces. It now echoed with the sounds of stomping feet, giggles behind doors, and the occasional full-volume argument about whose turn it was to pick the bedtime story. But today, as the boys played and the city hummed beyond the trees, Julian had one more thing he needed to say. Not to the board or the press or his own reflection. To Clara. He walked over, sitting beside her on the bench. She looked at him, curious but calm. "There's something I've been thinking about," he said. "Something I want to ask." Her smile shifted slightly, cautious. "You're not buying another house, are you?" He chuckled. "No. Though I might have found one with a backyard big enough for a zip line. She rolled her eyes fondly. But this time, it's not about houses. It's about us. Her fingers stilled on the book. I know we've been figuring this out as we go. I know it's been messy. And I know I've made more mistakes than I care to count. But every day, with you and the boys, every night reading stories or explaining why Pluto is or isn't a planet again, it's the most right my life has ever felt. Clara's breath caught just slightly, and she closed the book in her lap. I want more of this, Julian continued. Not just weekends and school plays and morning chaos. I want all of it. I want the fighting over crayons and the nights when no one sleeps. I want the silence we share after they're finally down. I want you. Her eyes glistened, and she whispered, Julian. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, dark blue velvet box. No grand speech. No audience. Just a man who had been changed by 4 boys and the woman who had raised them. I know we've already lived through a version of this, and I know we didn't get it right the first time, but maybe the second time. Maybe we know a little more. Maybe love doesn't need to be perfect to be worth everything. He opened the box. Inside was a simple ring, a modest diamond. But what caught Clara's breath wasn't the sparkle. It was the engraving inside. It read, 5 reasons, 1 forever. She looked at him, a tear slipping down her cheek. Yes, she said, before he even asked the question. Yes. From across the field, Liam shrieked, Mom! Dad! Theo tried to put a worm in my pocket. Clara laughed through her tears. Well, some things never change. Julian slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and offered her his hand. Let's go find out how bad the damage is. They walked toward the chaos together, hand in hand. Julian Grayson, the man once known for never making room in his life for anything he couldn't control, had finally surrendered to the one thing he couldn't predict, and in doing so, found a happiness he never thought he deserved. He had his sons. He had Clara. And this time, he wasn't going anywhere. Julian Hart was once a man defined by spreadsheets, mergers, and meticulously calculated decisions. As the CEO of a billion-dollar tech empire, he had spent most of his adult life chasing the illusion of control, believing that success meant keeping emotion at bay and building a fortress of achievement around himself. But everything changed the night he walked into a glamorous winter gala in Paris and saw his ex-wife, Clara Bennett, alongside 4 little boys who looked just like him. That single moment unraveled the very fabric of his life and rebuilt it into something far more meaningful. Clara had never intended to hide her sons from Julian. In truth, she had tried to reach him after their divorce, but her efforts were lost in the walls his empire had built. Left alone, she raised 4 identical yet beautifully different boys, Theo, Isaac, Ezra, and Liam, who grew up never knowing their father, but knowing love through their mother's strength and sacrifice. When fate threw them all back into Julian's life, he had a choice: protect the life he had built or embrace the one he had unknowingly left behind. And for the first time, he chose love over legacy. The journey was not without turmoil. Scandal loomed, the media circled, and betrayal came from the closest of sources. Julian's personal and professional life collided in the harshest spotlight imaginable. Yet amid it all, he made the conscious choice to be a father, not just in name, but in action. He learned bedtime routines. He listened to science presentations. He sat cross-legged on playroom floors with Legos underfoot and laughter ringing in his ears. He started over, with Clara, with the boys, and most importantly, with himself. What this story reminds us is that success, true success, is not measured by wealth or power. It's measured by presence, by connection, by the courage to repair what was broken. It teaches us that redemption is always possible, not through grand gestures, but through small, consistent acts of love. And perhaps the most profound truth: we don't get to choose the timing of life's biggest moments, but we always get to choose how we respond. Julian Hart responded by stepping away from the noise of ambition to answer the quiet call of fatherhood and reconciliation. Clara responded with grace, letting go of past hurt to build a new chapter. Together, they created a family not born from perfection, but from perseverance. Now, here's a question for you to reflect on. If you were in Clara's position, would you A. Give Julian a second chance for the sake of the children? B. Move on with life and raise the children alone? Comment your answer below, A or B, and tell us why. Let's learn from each other. Also, what do you think about Julian and Clara's story? Would you have made the same choices they did? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or just reminded you of what really matters in life, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep creating stories that touch the heart and soul.